The night my neighbor knocked on my door, I was already in bed. It was a little past 11, and I'd been asleep for maybe 20 minutes when I heard the knocking. 3 sharp raps. I sat up, disoriented, grabbed my phone off the nightstand. My neighbor Hank from next door was standing on my porch in a bathrobe and slippers, his face doing something I hadn't seen it do before. He looked embarrassed and worried at the same time. "I'm sorry to bother you this late, Arthur," he said, "but there were lights on in your back rooms again." And I could hear, it sounded like children, crying. I told him I'd been asleep. I told him I didn't have any grandchildren staying with me. My wife Margaret passed 4 years ago, and since then it's just been me in this house. He nodded slowly, like he wasn't sure whether to believe me or to feel sorry for me. Maybe both. I went back inside and stood in the hallway for a long time. The house was quiet. Too quiet, actually, the way it always is when you live alone. I checked the back rooms. The guest room, the study, the laundry room. Nothing. I told myself Hank was getting old. I told myself old houses make strange noises. But I didn't sleep again that night. That was the second week of January. By the third week, Hank had knocked twice more. Once at 9:30, once at 9:30. Both times he'd seen lights. Both times he said he heard something. The third time he came, he said, "Arthur, I don't want to alarm you, but I think someone might have a key to your house." I stood there in the doorway, 68 years old, retired from 32 years of civil engineering, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear exactly, more like a cold, slow recognition, like when you're looking at a blueprint and you suddenly see the flaw that was there the whole time. My son Morris had a key. Morris was 41. He'd lived in Portland for the last 12 years with his wife Deborah and their 2 kids, my grandchildren Lily and Owen. I loved those kids more than I could put into words. I hadn't seen them since Thanksgiving. I told myself it wasn't Morris. I told myself it couldn't be. That weekend, I drove to the hardware store and bought 4 security cameras. I installed them myself, 2 covering the front and back doors, 1 in the hallway, 1 in the kitchen. I set them all to upload to cloud storage. Then I drove to my buddy Ray's place across town and asked if I could stay a few nights. I said I was having some work done on the house. Ray didn't ask too many questions. He never did. That was why I'd been friends with him for 30 years. The first night I was gone, the cameras caught nothing. I sat in Ray's guest room watching the app on my phone, refreshing every hour like a man waiting for test results. The second night, at 11:47, the back door opened. I watched the footage on my phone and I felt my stomach drop so fast it was physical, like missing a step in the dark. Morris walked in first. He was wearing dark clothing and he moved through my kitchen like he'd been doing this for months. Because, I would later realize, he had been. Deborah came in behind him. She was carrying something. It took me a moment to understand what I was seeing. She was carrying a tote bag, and inside the tote bag were 2 manila folders, thick with papers. They went straight to my study. I sat in Ray's guest room and watched my son and my daughter-in-law go through my filing cabinet. Morris knew where I kept things. He'd grown up in that house. He knew every drawer, every cabinet. He went directly to the bottom drawer on the left, the one where I kept my financial documents, the one where I kept my life insurance policy, my deed, my brokerage account statements. Deborah took photos of everything with her phone. Then they put it all back exactly as it had been, and they left. The whole thing took 19 minutes. I sat there for a long time after the footage ended. I remember thinking about Margaret, about what she would have said. She always liked Deborah, said she had good instincts. I wondered what Margaret's instincts would have told her about this. I called my attorney, a man named Patterson, first thing the next morning. I'd used him for estate planning when Margaret passed. He was thorough and careful, and he didn't try to make me feel better when the news was bad. I told him what I'd seen. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he said, "Do not go back to that house yet, and do not let them know you've seen the footage." He explained what he thought they were looking for. My life insurance policy named Morris as the primary beneficiary, $2 million. My house, which I'd paid off 15 years ago, was worth close to $800,000. My brokerage account had another $400,000 in it. To someone who was in debt, which I did not yet know Morris was, that would look like a solution. Patterson told me to keep recording. He told me to contact my financial institutions quietly and put flags on everything. He told me not to change anything yet because that would tip them off. He said, "We need to understand what they're planning before we can stop it." That was the hardest part. Knowing and waiting. Sitting with it. I went back to the house 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning. I acted normal. I went through the mail, watered the plants Margaret had loved, made coffee. I walked through every room the way I always did. In the study, I opened the bottom drawer on the left. Everything looked the same. But I'd photographed it before I left, every single page in every folder, so I could check for subtle changes. Patterson had suggested that. One page was out of order. Just one. A copy of the deed. They were looking at the house. 2 weeks later, my son called and said he'd like to come visit. "Just me," he said. "I want some time with you, Dad. One-on-one." His voice was warm and easy, the way it used to be when he was a teenager asking to borrow the car. I said that sounded wonderful. I told him I'd make his favorite, the pot roast Margaret used to make, the recipe I'd learned after she was gone so I could still have it sometimes when I missed her. He arrived on a Saturday afternoon. He hugged me at the door. He smelled like the same cologne he'd worn since college. We ate dinner and talked about the kids, about Lily's soccer team, about Owen's trouble in math. He was warm, present, the best version of himself. After dinner, we sat on the porch with coffee and he started talking about money. He was careful about it. He started from a distance, talking about the economy, about interest rates, about how Portland's housing market had gone sideways. I listened and I nodded and I let him build toward it. He talked for a long time before he said what he was actually saying. He wanted me to sign the house over to him. Not as a gift, he was careful about that too. As a loan collateral arrangement, he called it. He had a folder with him, documents already prepared. "Dad, it's just paperwork. It protects both of us. If anything happens to you, there's no probate. Everything goes directly." "Let me look at it," I said. He handed me the folder. I took my time reading. Patterson had already told me what to look for. The language was dense, but the meaning was clear. It wasn't a loan collateral arrangement. It was a transfer of ownership, contingent on my signature and one witness, effective immediately upon notarization. There was a notary stamp already on the page, waiting for a signature line. I set the folder down on the porch table. "I want my attorney to look at this before I sign anything," I said. Something moved across Morris's face, just briefly. He recovered quickly. "Of course," he said. "Of course, Dad. No rush." But there was rush. I could feel it. After he left, I sat on that porch until the sun went down. The neighborhood got quiet, the way it does in winter. A dog barked somewhere. A car passed slow on the wet street. I thought about the day Morris was born. I was 32, same age he was when Lily was born, and I remembered standing in that hospital hallway with Margaret and thinking that nothing had ever been as frightening or as beautiful as that moment. I thought about his Little League games, his science fair project on bridge engineering, the summer he worked with me at the firm and complained every single day but showed up early every morning. I thought about Margaret's last months and how Morris had visited twice in 4 months, and how each time he'd ask questions about her care costs, about whether insurance was covering it. I had filed those moments away somewhere, put them in a drawer. Now I was taking them out. I met with Patterson on Monday. I showed him the documents Morris had brought. Patterson read them twice and set them down with a very controlled expression. He had these professionally prepared, he said. "I know. Arthur, whoever drafted this, knew exactly what they were doing. This would have been very hard to reverse after signing. I know that too. We spent 2 hours in his office. Patterson contacted my financial institution and changed the beneficiary documentation to a trust structure he'd set up for me years earlier, which now directed everything to a charitable foundation I was creating in Margaret's memory. He also drafted a new will. He recommended I contact an elder law specialist, a woman named Dr. Winslow, who worked with the county on financial exploitation cases. I did not feel angry sitting in that office. I felt something quieter and worse than angry. I felt like I was grieving someone who was still alive. The cameras were still running at the house. 10 days after Morris's visit at 2 in the morning, the back door opened again. This time it was Deborah alone. She moved faster than before. She went directly to the study. But the filing cabinet was locked now. I'd done that quietly, bought a new lock without changing anything else visible. She tried it twice. Then she went to the desk drawers, went through them methodically. She was looking for the documents Patterson had revised. She knew something had shifted, and she was trying to find out what. She didn't find anything. She stood in the middle of my study for a long moment, very still. Then she left. I forwarded the footage to Patterson and to Dr. Winslow. They now had 3 separate instances on camera of unauthorized entry using a key. That was enough, Dr. Winslow said, for the next step. What I'm about to tell you is the part I've gone over 100 times, not because I'm proud of it, but because I want to understand it. I want to understand how you can love someone their entire life, raise them with everything you had, watch them become a person and still not know them, or maybe know them and refuse to look. I asked Morris to come back. I called him and told him I'd thought it over and I wanted to talk about the documents again. He was at my door the following Saturday, and this time Deborah came with him. They sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Morris had done his homework as a kid, where Margaret had written her Christmas cards every December. Patterson was in the next room. I told them I'd had my attorney review the documents. I told them he'd found some concerns. I watched them both, the micro adjustments, the way Deborah's posture changed first, and Morris watched her before adjusting his own. Then I told them about the cameras. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I put my phone on the table and played the footage from the first night, the kitchen, the study, Deborah photographing my documents at midnight. Deborah looked at the table. Morris looked at me. I told him I knew about the debt. Patterson had helped me piece it together. A failed business investment, a second mortgage on their Portland house they hadn't mentioned to anyone, credit card debt that had compounded past the point of ordinary recovery. They were, by Patterson's estimate, about $300,000 underwater. I would have helped you, I said. If you had come to me and told me the truth, I would have helped you. Morris started to say something. He stopped. He tried again. Dad, I'm not going to press criminal charges, I said. Dr. Winslow from the County Elder Services Office explained what that process looks like, and I've decided against it, but I need you to hear something. He was quiet. I have restructured everything. The house, the accounts, the insurance policy. Everything goes to the Margaret Holbrook Foundation when I'm gone. The foundation will fund college scholarships for first-generation engineering students. I've already filed the paperwork. Patterson has copies. Dr. Hare, Winslow's office has copies. Deborah looked up from the table. There's nothing left to take, I said. That's not punishment. It's just what's true now. The silence in that kitchen was the longest of my life. They drove back to Portland that afternoon. I stood at the window and watched their car until it turned the corner and disappeared. Then I went and sat in Margaret's chair, the big reading chair she'd had for 20 years, the one by the window in the living room that still smelled faintly of her if I sat very still. I thought about Lily and Owen, my grandchildren, who had nothing to do with any of this. I had set up a separate education trust for each of them, directly, with no parental access until they turned 25. Patterson had handled that too. Whatever my son had done, those kids were still my grandchildren. Hank came over a few days later. He'd seen the different locks, seen Patterson's car in the driveway a few times. He didn't ask for details. He just brought over a casserole, the way people do in this part of the country when they know something has happened, but they're not sure what to say. We ate it at the kitchen table and talked about nothing in particular. His wife's garden, the road construction on 5th, whether the high school football team was going to have a better season. Before he left, he said, "Your lights look normal now." "Yeah," I said, "they do." People ask me sometimes. Well, they don't ask me, but I imagine they would, whether I regret not pressing charges, whether I went too soft. I don't think that's the right question. The right question is whether I handled it in the way I could live with, in the way Margaret would have recognized as mine. She used to say that revenge was a thing you thought you wanted until you had it, and then you just felt tired. She was usually right about things like that. I didn't need Morris in handcuffs. I needed him to know that I knew. I needed the thing between us to be honest, even if it was honestly broken. The foundation launched in April. We've already received 4 applications for the first scholarship cycle. I'm on the selection committee. I read every application myself. It's not the same as having a family dinner at this table. Not even close. Some things don't get restored. But I sit in Margaret's chair in the evenings, and I think about those 4 students and what they're going to build. And something in me, not all of me, but something, feels like it's pointed in the right direction. Hank still waves from his yard every morning. That's not nothing. I've been sitting with this story for a few months now, trying to figure out what I actually learned from it. Not the legal part. Patterson handled that. Not the practical part. The locks, the cameras, the trust documents. Those were just steps. What I keep coming back to is something quieter than any of that. Morris didn't become someone who would do this overnight. That's the part I had to reckon with. There wasn't a single moment where he turned. There were 100 small moments where I looked away, where I told myself the concern I felt was nothing, where I chose the easier interpretation because the harder one was too painful to hold. I did that for years. And I think that's its own kind of failure, not his, mine. You can love someone completely and still choose comfort over honesty when honesty would have cost you something. I did that. I'm not proud of it. What I've come to understand is that consequences don't appear from nowhere. Deborah photographing my documents at midnight didn't come from nowhere. That came from debt that was never addressed, from conversations that were never had, from a version of Morris that learned somewhere along the way that appearances mattered more than truth. I don't know exactly when that happened. I wish I did. But I know that the path from there to my kitchen at midnight was a long one, and it was made of choices, his and mine both. What kept me from falling apart through all of it was something Margaret used to say. She said that dignity wasn't about what happened to you. It was about what you decided to do with it. She wasn't quoting anyone. That was just how she thought. I used to take that for granted because she said things like that all the time, casually, between doing the dishes and turning off the lights. I take it less for granted now. I didn't press charges. I made that choice with a clear head, not because I was soft about it, but because I thought carefully about what I actually wanted. I wanted Morris to know that I knew. I wanted the pretending to end. I wanted whatever came next between us, even if it was silence, to be built on something real. Handcuffs wouldn't have given me that. The foundation gives me something closer to it. The 3 things I keep thinking about are simple enough that they almost sound obvious, but they didn't feel obvious while I was living through them. The first is that honesty has a cost, but so does avoiding it, and the second cost is always higher. The second is that real strength isn't about never being hurt. It's about not letting being hurt make you into someone you wouldn't recognize. The third is that you can build something meaningful out of almost anything, even the things that break you, if you're willing to be deliberate about it. The Margaret Holbrook Foundation is deliberate. Every scholarship application I read is deliberate. Hank waving from his yard every morning is, in its own small way, deliberate. That's what I have now. It's not everything I wanted, but it's mine, and it's honest. And on most days, that feels like enough.